Ron Rychlak is up next, but first, a Roman Catholic bishop has rebuked Democratic candidate for President Joe Biden for his stance on abortion. Bishop Rick Stika of Knoxville, Tennessee, is urging Biden to rethink his support for abortion, citing the inevitability of God's judgment. In a tweet on Sunday, Bishop Stika wrote, "At your judgment before God, how will you explain changing your position about abortion? And how will you explain promoting no limits and allowing all protections removed, protecting the most innocent?" Earlier this year, Stika also singled out Biden's running mate, Senator Kamala Harris, as, quote, an anti-Catholic bigot, end quote. Joe Biden has faced public criticism from other Catholic leaders, including Providence Bishop Thomas Tobin, and has even been denied communion for his public support for abortion. And for the first time in history, a clergy sex abuse trial has convened in the Vatican's criminal court. The case concerns abuse allegations that occurred at the St. Pius X Youth Seminary inside the walls of the Vatican, just steps from the papal residence. A priest at the seminary is accused of molesting an altar boy multiple times between 2007 and 2012. The rector of the seminary is also being charged for participating in a cover-up. Neither of the accused has responded publicly to the charges. The next hearing is scheduled for October 27th, and we will be continuing to cover this story. On March 2nd of this year, the Vatican opened its apostolic archive covering the papacy of Pope Pius XII, allowing researchers in. The wartime pope has been criticized by some for decades due to his alleged failure to speak out against the Holocaust. The Vatican's secret archive closed after only 1 week due to COVID-19. Now, after viewing some of the vast trove of records, a few scholars claim to have discovered proof that the Vatican under Pius XII was guilty of anti-Semitism and complicity in the Holocaust. Is that true? To react as one of the world's foremost experts on the actions of Pius XII during the war, he's an author of the book, Hitler, the War, and the Pope. Please welcome back to the program, Distinguished Professor of Law at the University of Mississippi, Ron Rychlak. Ron, thanks for being with us. For decades, the Vatican and scholars like you have been answering charges that Pius XII did nothing or was complicit in the Holocaust. But that was not always the story. For years after the war, the Pope was praised. What changed that narrative and when, very quickly?
Well, what really happened was in the late 1950s and early to 1960s, an operation directed from the Kremlin, a disinformation campaign set out to discredit not just Pope Pius XII, but really the Catholic Church religion itself by associating a pope with the Nazis.
So let's fast forward to March 2nd of 2020. The Pius XII records are made available to scholars before COVID shut it down. A few scholars were able to sift through at least some of the documents. One of them, a Father Hubert Wolf, a German professor of church history, announced he had a smoking gun proving Pius was an anti-Semite. Now, Ron, explain what he found, and does it really prove what he claims?
It absolutely does not prove what he claimed. It was what he claims. It was an internal memo in 1942. The Americans asked the Vatican, they said, we've heard these horrible things, and they went through a litany of things and said, can you confirm these matters? There was an internal memo to the Pope that said some of these may be true, but we can't confirm everything, and we know there are exaggerations. Even among Jewish people, they might be exaggerating. The Pope reported back to the United States, no, we can't confirm this. However, he then joined and made a very profound statement in December of 1942 about how Jews and people were being exterminated because of their descent or their race. He was actually correct. He made the right decision. He did not take this advice. I don't know how you take an internal memo and say that it was we don't follow the memo, and you say that shows anti-Semitism of some type.
Is there anything found by Father Wolf that is cause for alarm about the intentions or true heart of Pius XII, or even his staff at the time?
Now, of his staff, you can say there were people who were very profoundly trying to figure out what was taking place. and there was some doubt about whether all the accounts were true. And the account from the United States was not entirely correct. And so, no, I don't believe you can draw any such conclusion for it. We knew this was going to happen, but it's preposterous how quickly it happened.
Also, in that week that the archives were opened, a longtime papal critic, author David Kurzer, claimed in a piece in The Atlantic that he and his researchers found documents proving that the Vatican engaged in what he calls the kidnapping of 2 Jewish children whose parents were killed in the Holocaust. Those 2 orphan Jewish boys were adopted by a Catholic woman and later baptized. Now, Ron, this is not a news story. You've written about this in the past. What new information, if any, did Kurzer find, and is there anything to this assertion?
Well, once again, what was found was an internal memoranda written to the Pope. There's this discussion because the boys have been baptized, and that means the church has certain obligations. There was a lawsuit in France making its way through the courts, took almost 3 years, because the family wanted to get the children back. The lady who cared for them through these years wanted to adopt them. She'd had them baptized. So church leaders in France wrote to the Vatican and said, what do we do in this circumstance? An internal memo says, well, you got to consider what the church's obligations are. Now, when it comes to the Pope ultimately says he approves the deal to send the children back to the family. In fact, the official church itself cooperated and helped find the children to return them to the family. Somehow, because there was some debate internally about what was the appropriate matter, that becomes a basis for anti-Semitism. It's preposterous. As I wrote about for the Catholic League, I said this would have been true had it been a Muslim, had it been an atheist, had it been anyone. The church is concerned about people when they are baptized. They become Catholic then, and they have obligations. But ultimately, when push came to shove, Pope Pius XII said, put the children back with their extended family.
Ron, before the archives were briefly opened in March, Vatican archivists told reporters that the process of studying and analyzing and publishing findings should be long and slow and done with patience and care. Johann Ickes, the director of the Historical Archive of the Section for Relations with States, has a book out now in Italian and French, I guess it'll be in English soon, that you say verifies that Pius XII's actions during the war were honorable. Tell us about that, and how does he come to that conclusion?
Well, Johann is a good friend of mine, and having been the archivist, in the Vatican, in these archives for years, he's got an enormous head start on everybody else. He was able to look at documents that none of the rest of us could see, but he couldn't publish until the archives were open. And that's what he has done. And we see all sorts of efforts of rescue, of putting people together after the war, during the war, finding missing people, things that were unknown, but he knew about, and they are now in the book. They confirm, by the way, he's told me for years, what I've written will be confirmed when the archives are open, and his book says the same. It says the same. And so it's funny. The critics who have for years said you can't draw a judgment until all the documents are in, they find one rare document, an internal memoranda, and they say, okay, we've got it now. We can now prove that Pius XII was an anti-Semite, which it does no such thing. In fact, the Pope, in both of these circumstances, in essence, went away from the advice, and the advice was really laying out different possibilities. So it just trying to grab headlines, and we kind of knew this was going to happen. This is very foreseeable.
Ron, you yourself have made arrangements to study the archive. Your plans were thwarted by COVID. What did you expect and hope to find, and when do you think the archive might reopen?
Well, the archives have reopened now. They open, they open, then they close, then they open, then they close, and they're open now on a very limited basis. And so I'm beginning to look at when travel will become safe again, and when I go over there. And when you have to apply, you have to be credentialed to do this, and I did that, and I had my credentials, and I would have gone in June had not COVID shut everything down. But I have some specific areas of investigation that I would be looking into. You'd have to sort of chart that out beforehand, and it may be driven by some things. My next time, whenever I get to go, by some findings that perhaps come out in the interim. But there's several very interesting, very topical issues. There's some documents that I've been told about that have not been released yet that I would love to set my eyes upon. And I've got to make my way through Johann's book as well and see what all he's written about in his book.
Well, Ron, get over there fast. There's this report that 10% of the Swiss Guard now have COVID. They might shut the archive again on you. So book that flight quickly. And your book, Hitler, the War, and the Pope, has been revised and expanded over the years. It's become required reading, really, for anyone who wants a full scope of the information on Pius XII and the pontificate. It's actually being sent free of charge to all Catholic schools and colleges in the U.S. How did that come about? Very quickly.
The Zion Family Foundation from Alabama put the funding together because we knew this was going to happen. We knew people would find a document here or there and manufacture an argument, and we wanted to have a good resource available where people could go and look things up. And really what's come up both times so far is really in my book already. I mean, there's slight because there's an internal memo. I didn't specifically know that, but the large issues have been there. And so when you hear about these things, the research is there to address them, and we're very happy and we're thankful for the foundation for doing that.
Great. Hitler, the War, and the Pope. The revised and expanded edition by Ron Rychlak is available at bookstores everywhere, online, and at the EWTN Religious Catalog. Thank you so much, Ron. We will be in touch.
Thank you, Raymond.